My sister laughed at my ticket until the man in uniform spoke my name. My name is Emma Carter. I am 29 years old. The terminal buzzed with noise. You know the sound. It's a mix of rolling suitcases on smooth floors, muffled boarding calls from speakers overhead, and the low chatter of 100 different conversations. It's the sound of people going somewhere. But for me, it was the sound of being left behind. Then, it all stopped. A man in a crisp, dark uniform stepped into the space in front of me. He was tall, with broad shoulders and an air of quiet authority that made people notice. The noise didn't just quiet down. It felt like someone had hit a mute button on the entire airport. He looked directly at me. Not at my dad, not at my stepmother, and not at my sister Lily, who was in the middle of a loud, mocking laugh. He spoke, and his voice was clear and steady. Miss Emma Carter? Your jet is ready, ma'am. Every head turned. The man with the newspaper lowered it slowly. The woman sipping her latte paused with the cup halfway to her lips. Lily's laughter died in her throat, leaving her mouth hanging open in a silent, ugly shape. My stepmother's perfectly painted smile froze on her face. It looked like a mask that had cracked. And my dad, the man who had always stood so tall and unmovable, let his coffee cup slip from his hand. It hit the polished floor with a loud crack, splashing dark liquid across his expensive shoes. No one moved to clean it up. They all stared at me. And for the first time in years, I didn't shrink. I didn't look at the floor or wish the ground would swallow me whole. My back straightened. My chin lifted. I felt the air fill my lungs and I stood taller. My name is Emma Carter. I am 29 years old. And that moment, that perfect, silent moment in the middle of a crowded airport, was the end of one story and the beginning of another. It was the moment the world shifted under my family's feet. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. Now, let me take you back. Not years, not months, just 1 hour. Let me show you how it all began. The air in the airport felt heavy an hour before, thick with a tension only I seemed to notice. To everyone else, we probably looked like a normal family, a well-off family. My father, Richard Carter, looked important in his tailored suit. My stepmother, Susan, was the picture of elegance, her blonde hair perfectly in place, a string of pearls resting on her collarbone, and my half-sister Lily, at 23, was her mother's daughter, confident, beautiful, and utterly unaware of anyone but herself. Then there was me, the shadow, the afterthought. I followed a few steps behind them, the worn straps of my backpack digging into my shoulders. The backpack was old and faded, the same one I'd used through college, the same one I'd carried into my first office at my father's company, the same one I'd carried out of it for the last time 2 years ago. It held everything I needed, a laptop, a change of clothes, and a notebook full of ideas they would never understand. My family had matching designer luggage, a set of sleek silver suitcases that rolled silently beside them. They moved through the crowd like they owned the place, parting the sea of travelers with an air of entitlement. I just tried not to get in the way, but I always seemed to get in the way. The moment that man in the uniform called my name was a lifetime away. In that moment, standing in the silence, I remembered every single thing that had brought me there. I saw their faces not just as they were now, shocked, confused, disbelieving, but as they had been for years. I saw the dismissive glances from my father, the cold smirks from Susan, the outright mockery from Lily. It all flashed in my mind. For 2 years, I had been invisible to them. They had created a neat little world for themselves, a world where I didn't fit, and they had been perfectly happy with that arrangement. They had pushed me out of the family business, the one I had poured my heart and soul into. They had pushed me out of their lives. They thought they had left me with nothing. They assumed I was broken. They assumed I was struggling. Their occasional invitations to family events, like this one, weren't gestures of kindness. They were opportunities to remind me of my place, to show me everything I had lost and everything they had gained. It was a cruel, quiet power play, and for 2 years I had let them play their game. I had been working. I had been building. I had been fighting every single day in a world they knew nothing about. I worked when they slept. I planned when they partied. I sacrificed when they indulged. I built a new foundation for my life, brick by silent brick, far away from their judging eyes, and they never once asked. They never once called to see if I was okay. They never wondered what I did after I left the office with my one small box of belongings. My absence was a relief to them. It made their new family portrait perfect. So when that officer said my name, Miss Emma Carter, it was more than just a summons. It was a reckoning. It was the sound of my silence finally breaking. The years of being underestimated, ignored, and humiliated came to a head in that one stunning moment of public validation. My dad's dropped coffee cup was the sound of his world cracking. Lily's frozen laughter was the image of her superiority shattering. Susan's tight smile was the mask of her victory falling away. And me? I just stood there breathing. For the first time, breathing felt easy. The weight on my chest, the one I had been carrying for 2 long years, finally lifted. I was no longer the girl they had cast aside. I was no longer the victim in their story. In their eyes, I saw the question they were all afraid to ask. Who are you? They were about to find out, and it all started an hour earlier, with a simple boarding pass and a world of contempt. An hour before the world stopped, it was moving too fast. My father's voice cut through the noise of the check-in area, sharp and impatient. "Move faster, Emma, you're holding everyone up again." He didn't look at me when he said it. He was focused on the first-class counter, tapping his expensive watch. I was standing in the economy line, a good 20 feet away from them. I wasn't holding anyone up. But in my family, if something was wrong, the fault was always mine. It was the easiest solution. We were flying to New York. The trip was for what Susan called a family celebration. It was an awards gala she was co-chairing. For her, it was a chance to be seen, to be photographed, to be important. For my father, it was a business obligation dressed up as a family event. For Lily, it was a party. For me, it was a summons. I was the family's charity case, the strange, quiet daughter they had to invite to things to keep up appearances. My invitation had come as an afterthought. A text from my dad's assistant a week ago. "Mr. Carter requests your presence in NY for the gala. Your ticket is booked. Economy. See attached." Not a call from my dad. Not even a direct text. Just a message from a woman I'd never met. That was how my family communicated with me now. At the airport, the difference between them and me was a physical thing. It was in the clothes we wore, the luggage we carried, and the lines we stood in. They were in the priority lane, being helped by a smiling agent who called my father Sir. I was in the long, winding queue with everyone else, my worn backpack feeling heavier by the minute. Lily made sure everyone noticed the difference. She sauntered over from her line, her first-class boarding pass held delicately between 2 fingers like it was a winning lottery ticket. She waved it in front of my face. "Look, Emma, first class. It means you get champagne before the plane even takes off." She smiled. A bright, cruel smile. "Maybe you've never even flown before, have you?" The lie was so blatant, so designed to hurt that I almost laughed. I had flown dozens of times for the family business. I had been the one to take the red-eye flights to close deals while Lily was still in college, spending Dad's money on designer clothes. She knew I'd flown before. That wasn't the point. The point was to make me feel small. Before I could answer, Susan glided over, placing a gentle hand on Lily's arm. Her pearls gleamed under the airport lights. She gave me a look of pity, the kind you give to a stray dog. "Sweetheart, don't tease her," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "She's trying." They laughed together. Not a loud laugh, but a quiet, shared chuckle that was somehow worse. It was the laugh of people who were in on a joke, and the joke was me. It was a laugh that said, "Look at her. She doesn't belong." I stood silent. I had learned a long time ago that responding only gave them more ammunition. Anything I said would be twisted, used against me, turned into another story they could tell their friends about how difficult and sensitive Emma was. So I just clutched the straps of my backpack and stared ahead at the check-in counter. The backpack was a constant reminder. After Dad had remarried Susan, things changed slowly at first, then all at once. Susan started coming into the office. She had opinions on marketing. She thought the company logo was dated. She brought Lily in as an intern one summer, and Lily spent her days shopping online and taking long lunches. I was the vice president of operations. I had worked my way up. My biological mother, who passed away when I was 16, had started the company with my dad. It was supposed to be my legacy. I had spent my 20s working tirelessly, helping to triple the company's profits. I knew every employee by name. I knew every client's needs. Then one day, my father called me into his office. Susan was there, sitting in the chair beside his desk, her hand on his. Lily was there too, looking smug. "Emma," he had started, unable to meet my eyes. "We're making some changes. Restructuring. Restructuring. That's what he called it. He told me they were creating a new co-CEO position for Susan. He said Lily would be taking over a new creative development department. My role, the one I had dedicated my life to, was being dissolved. "There's just no place for you anymore, honey," Susan had said, her voice soft with false sympathy. "But we've put together a generous severance package." I didn't take the package. I just packed my things into a small cardboard box, put on this backpack, and walked out. I never looked back. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of silence. 2 years of them assuming I was failing. Now, standing in the airport, that silence felt loud. Lily's taunts, Susan's pity, my father's impatience. It was all part of the same story. The story where I was the disappointment. "Honestly, Dad," Lily said, turning back to him, her voice loud enough for the people around me to hear. "I don't know why we even bothered. She's just going to be miserable the whole time." My father just grunted in agreement, finally getting his boarding pass from the agent. He didn't defend me. He never did. His loyalty was to his new family now. I was a relic from his old life, a ghost at the feast. I finally reached the front of my line. The agent was tired and barely looked at me. "ID and confirmation," she said, her voice flat. I handed them over. As she printed my boarding pass, a cheap, flimsy piece of paper, I glanced over at my family. They were gathered by the window, looking out at the planes on the tarmac. They were laughing again. For a moment, a sharp pang of loneliness hit me. It was a familiar feeling, a cold ache in my chest. It was the feeling of being on the outside of a window, looking in at a life that was supposed to be yours. I took my boarding pass and walked towards them. I didn't have any bags to check. Everything I owned fit into the backpack on my shoulders. As I got closer, I heard Lily say, "I bet she's in a middle seat at the very back, right next to the bathroom." My dad chuckled. "It'll build character." The casual cruelty of it still had the power to sting. They weren't just ignoring me, they were actively enjoying my discomfort. This whole trip, this whole performance, was for their benefit, not mine. I was a prop in the grand play of their perfect lives. I stopped a few feet away from them, waiting. I knew what was coming next. The little lecture, the final reminder of my place. My dad turned, his face serious, his eyes cold. He saw me as a problem to be managed, an embarrassment to be contained. And that was a betrayal that cut deeper than any lost job or cruel joke. It was the betrayal of a father who no longer saw his daughter, only a liability. As we walked from the check-in counters toward the security checkpoint, the space felt both vast and suffocating. The high ceilings of the terminal echoed with announcements, but the space between me and my family was filled with a thick, heavy silence. They walked ahead, a united front of three, while I trailed behind like a forgotten piece of luggage. Lily, however, wasn't done with me. She seemed to feed on the attention of strangers, and today I was her target. She slowed her pace so she was walking beside me, linking her arm through my father's. "So, Emma," she began, her voice loud and theatrical, designed to be overheard. "Got your little bag of peanuts ready for the flight? I hear they sometimes give you the whole can in economy if you're lucky." A few people in front of us turned their heads. I could feel their curious glances. My cheeks started to burn, a hot, creeping shame that I fought to keep off my face. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the large digital departures board in the distance. My dad laughed. It was a deep, booming laugh that gave Lily permission to continue. He clapped her on the shoulder. "That's my girl," he said, pride in his voice. Pride in her cruelty. "Oh, and don't forget to wave from Coach," Lily called out, her voice ringing with glee. "Oh, wait, if you can even afford a ticket." She looked at Dad for approval. "We did pay for this one, right? I can never keep track of all the charity we do." The words hit me like stones. People were openly staring now. A mother pulled her child a little closer. A businessman raised his eyebrows over his phone. They didn't know the story, but they could see the scene. A well-dressed family and a poorly dressed girl. They saw a bully and a victim, and my own father was standing with the bully. I stayed calm. My face remained a blank mask. Inside my stomach was a tight knot of old hurt and fresh anger. I had promised myself I wouldn't let them see me break. Not here. Not ever again. That promise had been made 2 years ago, on the worst day of my life. The memory was so clear, it felt like it was happening right now, superimposed over the shiny floors of the airport terminal. I was in my office, the one with the big window overlooking the city. I had earned that office. I had spent weekends there, holidays there. I had built financial models on that desk, taken calls with international clients at 3 a.m. in that chair. The company, Carter Logistics, wasn't just my father's business. I felt like it was mine too. My real mother had named it. Her spirit was in the walls. My dad had called me to the main conference room. When I walked in, Susan and Lily were already there, seated at the long mahogany table as if they owned it. Which, I was about to find out, they basically did. "Emma," my father had said, clearing his throat. He couldn't look me in the eye. He stared at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "Susan has some wonderful new ideas for the company's direction. We're going to be diversifying." Susan had smiled, a thin, triumphant smile. "We're moving into lifestyle branding, dear. Logistics is so Industrial. Lily will be heading our new creative division. Lily, who was 21 at the time and had never worked a day in her life, beamed. I'm going to be an influencer for the brand, she'd said proudly. It felt like a joke, a nightmare. I had presented a 5-year growth plan to my father just a week before, detailing how we could expand our shipping routes and acquire a smaller competitor. He had praised it. He had called it brilliant. Now, he was talking about lifestyle branding. And what about my role? I had asked, my voice steady, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Well, Dad had said, finally looking at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name, pity, or maybe guilt. Your position? It's redundant now. Redundant. At 27, after dedicating my entire adult life to his company, I was redundant. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just nodded slowly. I stood up, walked back to my office, and began to pack my things. Susan followed me. She leaned against the doorframe, watching me take my photos off the desk. Don't take this so personally, Emma, she'd said, examining her manicure. It's just business. Your father needs a real partner now. Someone with vision, not just a worker. The insult was clear. I was just a worker, not family, not a partner. I picked up my worn backpack, the one I now carried through the airport, and walked out. No one said goodbye. I heard their laughter start up in the conference room before the elevator doors even closed. That day, walking out onto the busy street with one small box in my arms, I made a promise to myself. I would rebuild. I would create something that was entirely mine, something they couldn't touch, couldn't take, couldn't even understand. I would do it quietly. I would do it without them. And for 2 years, that's exactly what I did. I took the skills I'd honed at Carter Logistics, understanding supply chains, market trends, and acquisitions, and I applied them to a different field. I started small, consulting for tech startups. I lived in a tiny apartment and ate instant noodles for dinner. I poured every dollar I made back into my own company, a new logistics firm that focused on the tech sector, an area my father had always called a fad. He had no idea. They had no idea. They saw my cheap apartment and my old car as signs of failure. They didn't see the late nights, the contracts I was winning, the empire I was building in the shadows of their world. The buzz of the airport brought me back to the present. Lily was still talking, her voice a grating buzz in my ear. And the hotel in New York is 5-star. I hope you packed something decent to wear, Emma. You can't show up to the gala in that. She gestured vaguely at my simple black t-shirt and jeans. I finally stopped walking. I turned and looked directly at her. For the first time, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her chatter. I'll be fine, Lily. She looked surprised that I had answered. She searched for a new insult, a new way to get under my skin, but I just held her gaze. The burning in my cheeks had faded. The knot in my stomach had loosened. The memory of that awful day no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a foundation. It was the solid ground I was standing on. They thought they were humiliating me. But humiliation only works if you feel shame. And I wasn't ashamed. I was proud of the old backpack. I was proud of the simple clothes. They were the uniform of a soldier who had been through a war and was still standing. A war they didn't even know I had fought. We finally made it to the gate. Gate 17. The boarding area was split, just like our family. On one side, there was a quiet, roped-off section with plush leather chairs and private charging stations. That was for first class. That's where my father, Susan, and Lily settled in, handing their coats to an attendant who greeted them with a warm, practiced smile. On the other side was the general boarding area. It was a sea of hard plastic seats, crowded with families, students, and tired travelers. It was noisy and chaotic. This was my section. I found an empty seat against a far wall, away from everyone, and sat down. From where I sat, I had a clear view of them. They looked like they were in a different world. A waiter came and offered them drinks. Susan took a glass of white wine. Dad had an espresso. Lily was on her phone, probably posting a picture of her first-class lounge experience with a hashtag like "Being Blessed" or "Our Travel Goals." They never once looked over to my side. It was as if a glass wall stood between us, and they had no interest in looking through it. I was just a problem that had been solved. I was in my designated place, far away from them, where I couldn't bother them or tarnish their perfect image. The physical distance between us was a perfect metaphor for the emotional distance. They were over there in the light. I was over here in the shadows. I pulled my laptop from my backpack. The case was scratched and the corners were worn, but inside it was powerful. It held the keys to my new life. I connected to the airport's public Wi-Fi and started going through my emails. There was a message from my CFO about quarterly projections. They were better than expected. There was a note from my legal team confirming the final details of a new acquisition. There was an email from the organizers of the New York Gala, the one we were all flying to attend, with my final keynote speech attached. They had no idea I was the keynote speaker. They had no idea my company was the event's primary sponsor. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice my father walking over until his shadow fell across my screen. I looked up. He was holding a crisp $100 bill. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. "Get yourself something to eat. You look thin." It wasn't an act of kindness. It was an act of control. It was his way of reminding me that he was the provider, the one with the money, and I was the one in need. He wanted to see me as the struggling daughter he had to rescue with pocket money. I looked at the bill, then back at his face. I didn't take it. "I'm fine, Dad," I said quietly. He pushed the money closer. "Just take it, Emma. Don't be difficult." "I don't need it." His jaw tightened. He hated being refused. It challenged the narrative he had built in his head. "Emma, do us a favor," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "When we get to New York, just try to fit in. Don't embarrass the family name." The words hung in the air between us. Don't embarrass the family name. The name he had taken from me. The name I was now building into something far bigger than he could imagine, all on my own. I met his eyes. For a second, I thought about telling him everything. I thought about showing him the email on my screen, the one confirming my company's multi-million-dollar sponsorship of the very event he was attending. I thought about telling him that I wasn't just fitting in, I was running the show, but I didn't. The time wasn't right. The stage wasn't big enough. Instead, I said something else. Something quiet and strange that he wouldn't understand until later. "People always talk, Dad. It's what they say later that matters." He stared at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He didn't get it. He just saw defiance. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disgust. "Whatever that means," he muttered, stuffing the $100 bill back into his pocket. He turned and walked away without another word, back to the comfort and safety of his first-class world. I watched him go. The isolation was complete. He hadn't asked how I was. He hadn't asked about my life. He had just come over to give me an order and some cash, like I was a troublesome teenager instead of a 29-year-old woman. A few minutes later, the boarding announcement began. "We are now pleased to invite our first-class passengers to board at Gate 17. I watched as Susan, Lily, and my father stood up. They gathered their things, smiling and laughing as they handed their boarding passes to the agent. They walked down the jet bridge, their expensive luggage rolling silently behind them. They didn't look back, not once. Just like that, they left me behind. I sat there for a long time, watching the empty gate area where they had stood. The other passengers started to line up, divided into their boarding groups. I was in Group 5, the last to board. The feeling of being abandoned was cold and familiar. It was the same feeling I'd had when my dad told me my job was redundant. It was the same feeling I'd had at his wedding to Susan. It was the feeling of being utterly, completely alone. But something was different this time. The loneliness wasn't crushing me. Underneath the hurt, there was a current of something else. Something strong and steady. It was power. It was patience. They thought they were on a different level than me. They were, but they had it all wrong. They were heading to their comfortable seats, sipping champagne, completely oblivious. They thought they were flying high above me. I looked out the massive terminal window at the plane they had just boarded. It was a standard commercial airliner, painted with the logo of a major carrier. A carrier that, as of 3 months ago, my tech logistics company held a controlling stake in. They were flying on my plane. They just didn't know it, and I wasn't getting on that plane at all. I closed my laptop, a small, calm smile touching my lips for the first time that day. Their flight was about to take off, but mine was just getting ready. As the last of the economy passengers shuffled down the jet bridge, the laughter of my family seemed to echo in the now empty gate area. It was a ghost sound, a reminder of the humiliation that had been so fresh just moments before. I stood there alone in the quiet aftermath of their departure. This was always the hardest part. The moment after the confrontation, after the insults, when I was left by myself to process the sting. For years, moments like this would send me into a spiral. I would question my worth. I would replay their words in my head, letting them cut me over and over again. I would feel small, powerless, and broken. But today was different. As I stood there watching their plane get pushed back from the gate, I didn't feel broken. The pain was there, a dull ache in my chest, the familiar bruise of their neglect. But it wasn't the only thing I felt. Beneath the pain, a quiet power was rising like a tide coming in. It was the power of a secret, What they didn't know could fill a library. They didn't know about the 2 years I had spent clawing my way back from nothing. They pictured me in a dead-end job, living in a tiny apartment barely getting by. That narrative suited them. It confirmed their decision to cast me aside. It made them feel powerful and justified. The reality was something they could not comprehend. After leaving Carter Logistics, I didn't just find a new job. I created a new industry. I took my knowledge of global shipping and applied it to the one area my father had always ignored: technology infrastructure. While he was busy shipping furniture and machine parts, I was building a system to move the most valuable commodity in the modern world: data. I founded a company, Carter Systems, deliberately choosing a name so close to his that it would one day be confusing. I worked relentlessly. There were nights I slept on a couch in my tiny office, using code books as a pillow. There were weeks where I lived on coffee and the sheer stubborn refusal to fail. I remembered Susan's words, "It's just business," and I made them my mantra. I became ruthless, efficient, and strategic. I took all the pain and loneliness and channeled it into work. It was the only thing that didn't hurt me. It was the only thing I could control. My first big break was a contract with a new cloud computing company. They needed a logistics partner who understood speed and security. I built a custom solution for them. After that, other tech giants started to notice. My little company grew. I hired my first employee, then 10, then 100. We became the silent backbone of the tech boom, the invisible network that made everything else possible. And I made money. More money than my father had ever made with his industrial business. But I didn't change my lifestyle. I still drove my old car. I still lived in a modest apartment. I still wore simple clothes and carried my worn backpack. The money wasn't the point. The power was. The quiet power to build something they couldn't touch. My biggest move came 6 months ago. I saw an opportunity. One of the country's major airlines was struggling. Their stock was undervalued, and their logistics were a mess. I knew logistics. Using a series of shell corporations and investment firms, my company began quietly acquiring their stock. 3 months ago, we gained a controlling stake. We weren't just shareholders, we were the new owners, operating from behind the scenes while we planned a complete overhaul. The airline my family was currently boarding, that was us, they never asked. That was the part that hurt the most, even more than the insults. In 2 years, my father had never once called and asked, "Emma, what are you doing now? How are you building your life?" Susan and Lily certainly never cared. My success, my struggle, my entire existence outside of their orbit was a complete blank to them. They had pushed me out, and then they had closed the door and never looked out the window to see where I had gone. And now, they were about to learn. Not because I was going to shout it. Not because I was going to throw my success in their faces. They were going to learn because our paths, which they had tried so hard to separate, were about to collide in a way they could never have anticipated. Their plane was now taxiing toward the runway. I watched it go. A silver tube carrying the 3 people who thought they had left me in the dust. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like watching a movie I already knew the ending to. The breaking point wasn't a moment of tears or anger. It was a moment of absolute clarity. The pain of their rejection was real, but it no longer defined me. It was just a part of my story, the chapter that explained how I got my strength. They had meant to break me. Instead, they had forged me into someone they wouldn't recognize. I turned away from the window. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my personal pilot, a man named Captain Reynolds. "Pre-flight checks are complete, Miss Carter. We are ready for you at the private terminal when you are." I texted back a simple reply, "On my way now." I slung my backpack over my shoulder. The weight of it felt different now. It didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an anchor. It was a reminder of who I was and how far I had come. I started walking away from Gate 17, my footsteps sure and steady on the polished floor. I wasn't heading for another gate. I was heading for a different exit, one that led to a world my family didn't know existed. A world that I had built. They thought the story was over. They thought they had won. But they didn't realize they were just minor characters in my story now. And the most important chapter was just about to begin. The humiliation was over. The quiet power was all that remained. I started to walk away from Gate 17, planning to find a quiet corner in the terminal to wait. My flight wasn't for another hour, and I needed a moment to let the adrenaline settle. The gate agents were already starting to clean up, removing the ropes and consolidating the trash. The last call for their flight had faded, and a sense of normalcy was returning to the area. A few stray travelers were still gathering their things, but the main crowd had dispersed. I had only taken a few steps when a presence in front of me made me stop. It wasn't just someone walking past. It was a deliberate, solid stop. I looked up. A tall man in a crisp, dark navy uniform stood directly in my path. His uniform was immaculate, with polished buttons and sharp creases. He wore a pilot's hat, and his expression was professional and unreadable. He looked like he had stepped out of a movie. His presence was so commanding that it created a small bubble of silence around us. The few people nearby instinctively paused their conversations and looked over. He met my eyes directly. There was no hesitation. "Miss Carter?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and carried an undeniable authority. For a heartbeat, I thought he had the wrong person. Years of being overlooked had conditioned me to assume I was invisible. My first instinct was to look behind me, to see who he was really talking to, but he was looking right at me. "I'm Emma Carter," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. He gave a slight formal nod. "My apologies for the delay. Your private jet is ready. We'll begin pre-flight whenever you wish." The words seemed to hang in the air, shimmering and unreal. "Your private jet." The gate agent who had been collecting trash stopped, her hand frozen mid-air. A janitor pushing a wide broom paused his sweeping. The small group of passengers who had been waiting for the next flight all turned to stare. It was in that moment that my family reappeared. The jet bridge was still connected to the plane, and a flight attendant had come out to speak to the gate agent. My father, Susan, and Lily must have been held up for a moment, because they were walking back out of the tunnel, their faces etched with annoyance. "They said there's a minor mechanical check," Dad was complaining loudly. "Of all the incompetence," Lily was whining. "My champagne is going to get warm." They emerged from the jet bridge and into the terminal just as a ripple of gasps went through the small crowd that had gathered around me and the officer. They saw the scene, me, the officer, and a dozen strangers staring. My father's complaint died on his lips. He spun around, his eyes wide as he took in the uniformed man standing before me. Lily, who had been looking at her phone, froze mid-step, her perfectly made-up face a mask of confusion. Susan's hand flew to her pearls, a gesture of pure shock. My heart was thundering in my chest. It felt like a drum beating against my ribs, a wild rhythm that threatened to shake my whole body. But on the outside, I was perfectly still. The years of hiding my emotions, of presenting a calm face to their storms, had become a kind of superpower. I looked at the officer, my expression unreadable. I gave him a small, polite smile. "Perfect timing," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the sudden silence. I was getting tired of standing. The officer nodded again, his professionalism unwavering. He didn't seem to notice the scene unfolding around us. He was focused only on me, his client. He gestured with a gloved hand toward a set of large, unmarked glass doors at the far end of the concourse, away from all the numbered gates. "If you'll follow me, Miss Carter. A car is waiting to take you to the executive terminal." I nodded. "Thank you." I adjusted the strap of my backpack on my shoulder and started to walk. To get to those glass doors, I had to walk directly past my family. They stood there like statues, frozen in disbelief. As I moved, the world seemed to slow down. I could hear the faint click of my simple boots on the polished floor. I could feel the eyes of every stranger on me. They weren't looks of pity anymore. They were looks of awe, of curiosity, of shock. I kept my chin high. I didn't look at my family as I approached, but I could feel their stunned silence. It was more powerful than any of their insults. Their mockery, their laughter, their taunts. It all felt like it had happened a lifetime ago, to a different person. They had spent the entire morning trying to make me feel small and insignificant. And now, this man in a uniform had arrived and, with a few simple words, had shown them that my world was bigger than they could have ever imagined. The power hadn't come from me shouting or fighting back. It had come from the quiet, undeniable truth of my reality. As I drew level with them, Lily finally found her voice. But it wasn't the confident, mocking tone she had used before. It was a shaky, confused whisper. "Emma?" I didn't stop. I didn't look at her. I just kept walking toward those glass doors, toward the car, toward my jet, toward my life. The walk was only about 50 feet, but it felt like the longest and most significant journey I had ever taken. Each step was a step away from the girl they thought I was, and a step toward the woman I had become. As I walked past, the invisible wall that had separated me from my family all morning finally shattered. They were no longer in a different world, looking down on me. They were standing on the same ground, but suddenly, it was tilted in my favor. Lily's voice, when it came again, was thin and trembling. It was the voice of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just been broken. Her jet, she stammered, looking from me to the officer, who was now walking a respectful pace behind me. The officer, without breaking stride, replied in that same professional, matter-of-fact tone. He didn't address her directly, but answered the question as if it were a simple request for information. Yes, ma'am. Miss Carter owns it. Silence. It was a profound, heavy silence that swallowed every other sound in the terminal. If my father's coffee cup hitting the floor had been the sound of his world cracking, this was the sound of it turning to dust. I chanced a quick glance at them. I saw their faces, stripped of all their earlier arrogance. The smirks, the condescending smiles, the looks of pity, they were all gone. In their place was raw, unfiltered disbelief. Lily's face was pale, her mouth slightly open. Susan looked like she had seen a ghost, her carefully constructed composure completely gone. But it was my father's expression that I will never forget. His face was a storm of confusion, shock, and something else I couldn't quite identify. It might have been fear. The man who had always been in control, the patriarch who dictated the fortunes of his family, looked utterly lost. His voice, when he finally spoke, was cracked and weak. It was a voice I had never heard from him before. Emma, what is this? I finally stopped. I was just a few feet from the glass doors. I turned to face him fully. The hurt was still there, deep in my bones, but it was overshadowed by a calm, quiet strength. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to list my accomplishments. The scene around us was doing all the talking. I offered him a faint smile. It wasn't triumphant or smug. It was sad in a way. A sad smile for everything we had lost, for everything he had thrown away. You were right, Dad, I said, my voice soft but clear. I can't afford economy. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I added, it's too small for me now. A low murmur went through the crowd of onlookers. A few people had their phones out, discreetly filming. The story was too good to resist. The family drama, the surprise twist, the underdog's sudden victory. I had become the main character in a public play. My father took a half step forward, his hand slightly raised as if to stop me. Emma, wait. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, the calmness in my voice unwavering. My flight is ready. Lily finally snapped out of her shock, replaced by a surge of familiar angry jealousy. You're lying, she hissed, though her voice lacked any real conviction. This is a trick. You hired him, didn't you? To embarrass us. The idea was so absurd, so typical of the way her mind worked, that I almost laughed. She couldn't imagine a world where I had actually succeeded. Her only frame of reference was one of deceit and manipulation. The officer stepped forward slightly. Ma'am, I can assure you this is no trick. I am Captain Reynolds, and I fly for Carter Systems Executive Fleet. He said the name of my company, Carter Systems, and I saw another wave of shock hit my father. He knew the name. It had been making waves in the business world for the last year. He had probably read about it in the Wall Street Journal. He just never in a million years would have connected it to me. I gave them one last look. I saw them not as the monsters who had tormented me, but as they were in that moment, small, confused, and powerless. Their world had been built on a foundation of superiority, and that foundation had just crumbled. I turned my back on them for the final time and walked toward the glass doors. They slid open automatically as I approached, and a wave of bright sunlight spilled across the polished floor. It was like stepping out of a dark room and into the day. A sleek black car was parked just outside on the tarmac, its engine humming quietly. A driver in a black suit stood holding the rear door open for me. Beyond the car, I could see it, my jet. It was a beautiful Gulfstream, its white body shimmering in the morning sun. It was a symbol of everything I had built, everything I had earned through silence and hard work. I stepped into the car without a backward glance. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, shutting out the noise of the terminal, shutting out the sight of my family, shutting out the past. As the car pulled away, I looked out the window. My father, Susan, and Lily were still standing there, silhouetted against the terminal lights, watching me go. They looked like statues in a museum, relics of a life I no longer lived. The inside of the car was silent and cool. It smelled of polished leather and clean air. The chaos of the terminal faded away into a distant memory, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Through the tinted windows, the world outside seemed distant and muted. As we drove across the tarmac, we passed the commercial airliner my family was on. It looked large and clumsy from this angle, a lumbering giant chained to the rules of the public world. Then we passed it, heading toward a more private, exclusive part of the airport. The jet was even more impressive up close. Its lines were sleek and powerful, a testament to engineering and design. It was a machine built to defy gravity, to rise above the world. Captain Reynolds was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, his expression as professional as ever. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter," he said with a respectful nod. I walked up the stairs and into the cabin. The interior was understated and elegant. Soft cream-colored leather seats, polished dark wood panels, and subtle brushed metal accents. The light was soft and the air was still. This was my space, a space I had created, a sanctuary I had earned. It was the polar opposite of the crowded, noisy gate where I had been humiliated just a short time ago. I settled into one of the large, comfortable seats by a window and set my worn backpack on the seat opposite me. It looked out of place in such luxurious surroundings, but to me, it was the most important piece of luggage on the plane. It was my reminder. Captain Reynolds came into the cabin after a final word with the ground crew. "We're cleared for takeoff whenever you're ready, Miss Carter," he said. "Destination, New York." "Let's go, Captain," I said. My voice was calm, but inside a new feeling was taking root. It wasn't revenge. It was something cleaner, purer. It was closure. I added, "I've got a summit to host." He nodded and disappeared into the cockpit. A few moments later, I felt the gentle rumble of the engine starting up. The jet began to move, rolling smoothly toward the runway. We didn't have to wait in a long line of planes. We were given immediate clearance. As we ascended, the world below shrank away. The airport, the city, all of it became a map of tiny lights and shapes. I watched as we climbed higher and higher, breaking through a thin layer of clouds into the brilliant, unending blue of the sky. Up here, at 30,000 feet, the world felt different. The problems on the ground seemed small and insignificant. I leaned my head back against the soft leather and closed my eyes, letting the quiet hum of the engines wash over me. My mind went back to the gala, the family celebration in New York. The irony was almost too perfect. When my father's assistant had sent the curt invitation, I had almost deleted it. Attending another event where I would be treated like a pariah was the last thing I wanted to do. But then I saw the name of the event, the Global Tech and Innovation Summit. I laughed out loud in my small apartment when I read it. My father's company, Carter Logistics, had a booth there every year. They were a minor sponsor, a small Old World fish and a massive New World pond. They went to network, to try and stay relevant in a world that was rapidly leaving them behind. What my father didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that the main sponsor of the summit this year was my company, Carter Systems. The decision to sponsor the event had been purely strategic. It was the most important tech conference of the year, the perfect place to announce our new global expansion. I had been working on the sponsorship deal for months. The fact that my father and his new family would be there was a coincidence, a strange twist of fate. But when I received that invitation, a new plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not at first. It was a plan for reclamation. For years, they had defined my story. They had painted me as a failure, a disappointment. This was my chance to tell the story myself, to show them, and the world, who I had become, not with angry words, but with undeniable success. I would be the keynote speaker at the gala dinner. My face was on the program, my name listed as the CEO of Carter Systems. But my father wouldn't read the program. He never bothered with details like that. He would show up, expecting to be a guest, and he would find out that he was in my house. The plan had felt abstract, a distant event on my calendar. But now, flying high above the earth in my own jet, it was becoming real. The airport scene had just been the prelude. The main event was tonight. A flight attendant quietly appeared by my side. "Can I get you anything, Miss Carter? Champagne? Coffee?" I thought of Lily mocking me about first-class champagne. "Just some water, please." "Thank you." She returned a moment later with a glass of sparkling water on a small silver tray. I took it and looked out the window. Far below, I saw another plane, a tiny silver speck moving much more slowly through the sky. It was probably their flight. They were sitting in their first-class seats, feeling superior, completely unaware that I was soaring miles above them, both literally and figuratively. I thought about my father. I thought about the look on his face, the shock, the confusion. For the first time, he was seeing me as a person separate from him, an unknown entity he couldn't control. He was a man who understood the world through power and money. He had taken both from me, assuming that would be the end of my story. He could not comprehend that I had gone and found my own. The truth was, I owed him something. Not gratitude, but something close to it. His betrayal had been the catalyst for my new life. By pushing me out, he had forced me to learn how to fly on my own. Susan's cruelty had fueled my ambition. Lily's mockery had steeled my resolve. They thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize they had planted a seed. The flight to New York was short. As we began our descent, I looked down at the sprawling metropolis, a city of endless possibilities, a city where fortunes were made and lost, I had lost one life, and I had come here to claim another. Tonight, in a ballroom filled with the most powerful people in my industry, I would step onto a stage. My family would be in the audience. And for the first time, they would be forced to listen to my voice. The exposure wasn't just about them seeing my jet. It was about them seeing me, the real me. And that was a truth that would hit them harder than any financial success. The grand ballroom of the hotel was breathtaking. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting a warm, golden light over hundreds of guests in tuxedos and evening gowns. The air buzzed with the low hum of conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft melody of a string quartet playing in the corner. It was a room that radiated power, wealth, and influence. I stood on a private balcony overlooking the main floor, hidden from view. I had arrived early, using a private entrance to avoid being seen. From my vantage point, I could see everything. I watched as the leaders of the tech world mingled and networked. I saw CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies, brilliant innovators, and savvy investors. This was my world now. These were my peers. Then I saw them. My father, Susan, and Lily entered the ballroom like they owned the place. Dad was in his best tuxedo, looking important. Susan was wearing a shimmering silver gown, her pearls replaced with a diamond necklace. Lily was in a bright red dress, clearly designed to attract attention. They scanned the room, looking for people they knew, ready to play their part as members of the elite. I watched them for a while, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. They found a small table near the back, their assigned seating. It wasn't a prime spot. It was the kind of table reserved for minor sponsors. I saw my father's face tighten with a flicker of annoyance when he saw the table number. He was used to being at the center of the room. They had no idea I was watching them. They had no idea I was even here. I wondered what they had talked about on their flight after the scene at the airport. Had they convinced themselves it was all a misunderstanding? A fluke? Had Lily decided I had rented the jet to pull off an elaborate prank? Their minds would have scrambled to find an explanation that kept their world intact, one where I was still the failure they needed me to be, my assistant. A sharp young woman named Clara appeared silently beside me. "It's 5 minutes until your keynote, Miss Carter. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, Clara, I'm ready." I spent the next few minutes backstage going over the notes for my speech one last time, but the words on the page didn't matter as much as the feeling in my heart. This speech wasn't just about my company's new expansion. It was about my own. Finally, the master of ceremonies, a well-known tech journalist, walked to the podium on stage. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice booming through the sound system. "It is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening. This is a person whose work is quietly revolutionizing the backbone of our digital world. The company they built from the ground up has become one of the most vital and powerful forces in global technology." I watched my family from the wings of the stage. They were listening politely, probably wondering which famous tech billionaire was about to appear. The announcer continued, "Tonight, we are honored to have them here to share their vision for the future. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to the founder and CEO of our lead sponsor, Carter Systems, Miss Emma Carter." The name hit the room like a shockwave. I saw my father's head snap up. He froze, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. He looked around wildly as if expecting someone else to walk out. Lily's jaw dropped, her face going completely pale under her makeup. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Susan simply stared at the stage, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Applause began to ripple through the ballroom. The people in this room knew Carter Systems. They knew its reputation. They were applauding my success. I walked out from the wings and into the spotlight. I was wearing a simple, elegant dark blue dress. I didn't need sequins or diamonds. My presence was enough. I walked calmly to the podium, the sound of the applause washing over me. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then my eyes found my family's table. I locked eyes with my father. In that moment, I saw it all on his face. The dawning comprehension, the shattering of his denial, the terrible, undeniable truth. The girl he had dismissed, the daughter he had cast aside, was the powerful CEO being honored on this stage. When the applause died down, I began to speak. My voice was steady and clear. "Good evening," I began. "It's an honor to be here with all of you tonight." I started by talking about technology, about supply chains, about the future of data. I laid out my company's vision, our plans for innovation. The audience was captivated. I could feel their energy, their respect. Then I shifted my tone. I made it personal. 2 years ago, I said, my voice becoming softer, more intimate. I was told that I was redundant. I was told that my ideas didn't matter. I was told I didn't belong in a room like this. I didn't look at my family, but I could feel their stares burning into me. The rest of the audience leaned in, sensing a story. When you lose everything you thought you were supposed to be, I continued, you have two choices. You can let it break you, or you can let it build you. You can take the stones that people throw at you, and you can use them to build a new foundation. I paused, letting the words sink in. Tonight, I stand here not as a victim of my past, but as the architect of my future. My company, Carter Systems, was built on a simple idea. The world is always changing. The old ways of doing things are not enough. You have to be willing to tear down what isn't working to build something stronger. I finally allowed my gaze to drift back to my father's table. His face was ashen. He had dropped his champagne glass, and the golden liquid was now a dark stain on the white tablecloth. I looked directly at him, but my words were for the entire room. Some families give you wings to help you fly, I said quietly into the microphone. Others give you wind, a storm that pushes you from the nest and forces you to fly on your own. Either way, you learn to fly. A wave of murmurs, and then a swell of applause started to build. People were standing up. They were not just applauding a successful CEO. They were applauding a survivor. They were applauding a story of resilience that resonated with everyone. When the entire ballroom was on its feet, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of revenge. It was a smile of release, a smile of peace. I had not destroyed them. I had simply outgrown them. I had not exposed their cruelty for the sake of punishment, but for the sake of my own liberation. I had finally told my own story, and in doing so, I had taken back my name. The night wasn't about their humiliation. It was about my closure. Later that night, long after the applause had faded and the ballroom had emptied, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass window of my hotel suite. The city of New York glittered below me, a breathtaking tapestry of a million lights, a million stories. On the distant runway of a private airfield, I could see my jet, a sleek silhouette shimmering under the airport lights, waiting to take me to my next destination. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had stood in the airport that morning, bracing for humiliation. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her eyes were calm and steady. She was free. The weight of their judgment, a burden I had carried for years, was finally gone. If you've ever been laughed at, overlooked, or underestimated by the very people who were supposed to build you up, you know that the deepest scars are the ones no one can see. You fight silent battles every day, trying to prove your worth to people who have already decided you have none. I looked into the camera, into your eyes. If you've ever been laughed at by those who doubted you, I said, my voice soft but strong, don't argue, don't fight. Don't try to convince them. Just rise. Rise so high they can't see you anymore. Let your success be the conversation. Let your peace be the final word. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. It was a smile of contentment, of a battle won not by fighting, but by building. Hit like if you've ever been underestimated, and subscribe if you believe success is the quietest and most powerful revenge of all.